Is England's history the most impactful of any country? It's certainly in the running for it. At its height, England commanded a third of the world, spreading ideas, technology, goods, people, and violence to every corner of the globe. But how did England end up so powerful? In this series, we will chart the history of England from its first settlement through the days of knights and castles to its globe-spanning empire and to its modern-day state. The first modern humans arrived in England about 30,000 years ago. Neanderthals and other hominid species had inhabited the land before, but they would all die out with the arrival of modern humans if they hadn't died out already. These early humans crossed over via the now submerged Doggerland in the modern North Sea and soon scattered themselves across Britain. Cave drawings and stone artifacts are all that remains of these earliest peoples, although genetic studies have drawn direct links between the modern English and remains that are at least 9,000 years old. In time, rising sea levels submerged Doggerland, leaving Britain accessible only by the sea. Waves of settlers continued to trickle in by boat over the following millennia. The nomadic or semi-nomadic Paleolithic hunting cultures were supplanted by these new settlers who brought agricultural life and the prototypes of later Brittonic and Celtic languages with them. By 3000 BC, settled communities had emerged with primitive houses and rudimentary mines which were used to extract flint for tools and weapons. Among the most obvious legacies of these communities are large barrows dug deep into the ground where they buried their dead with a selection of treasures, indicating some belief in an afterlife and some level of social hierarchy. After 3000 BC, a group known as the Bourke people, named for the distinct shape of their pottery, arrived and supplanted many of the existing inhabitants. Initially, they were a nomadic people, but they too settled down into agricultural communities which gave way to larger villages and more complex burials. Stonehenge. The development of these complex societies can be easily seen in their most famous monument of early England, Stonehenge. First raised on the Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire around 2200 BC, Stonehenge appears to have been a ritual site, although it may also have served as a public forum, a calendar, or a burial ground at different times simultaneously. Traces of villages and other human activity around it suggest it drew in visitors from a wide area. The stones used to build it were hauled all the way over from South Wales. Transporting and raising these stones would have been a difficult and labor-intensive task. That it was even possible is proof that England had reliable travel networks, enough food to sustain a sizable, non-agricultural laboring population, and had social authorities that were capable of commanding that labor and those resources. Not far from Stonehenge, archaeologists discovered the grave of the Amesbury Archer, who appears to have been some sort of chieftain or high priest. His grave was rich with artifacts like copper knives and golden jewelry. He may have been a wealthy pilgrim, or perhaps a local chieftain. Combined with other evidence of villages across the region, the Salisbury Plain appeared to be the center of a small civilization, of which Stonehenge was the most sacred heart. Civilizations like this spread across England during the Bronze Age. These were warrior societies with plenty of weapons and remains of those who died in warfare. Larger settlements were often built on raised hills and surrounded by defensible wooden walls, showing that warfare was a constant concern for people. Religious life appears to have been heavily based on the land. Rivers especially were held to be sacred sites, and a great many artifacts have been found tossed into rivers as offerings to the gods. Even in this early stage, the regional divisions of modern England were emerging. The colder and more mountainous north were dominated by livestock, which led to sparser settlement. Meanwhile, southern England was more favorable to agriculture, leading to more concentrated settlement. The Thames Valley, with its easy trade access to Europe, was the wealthiest and most cosmopolitan area of the island, just as it is today. The society was advanced enough to play its part in much larger trade networks. Although it was on the far reaches of the known world, English traders connected to those in the Baltics, Greece, and even Egypt or beyond. Imports of precious beads, metals, furs, and other goods show England had plenty of things to exchange with the wider world. Most significant among England's exports was tin. The land was rich in tin, which the inhabitants were mining by the middle of the 2nd millennium BC. It was tin combined with copper which produced the all-important bronze that defined the age. While England was not the only source of tin, it was one of the best and drew in traders from distant lands. English tin ended up in the Middle East and helped outfit armies as diverse as those of Pharaonic Egypt or the Mycenaean Greece. Of course, the English worked with bronze themselves to outfit their warriors and leaders with bronze weapons, shields, jewelry, and other tools or treasures that became symbols of the native ruling class. From the 7th century BC, a new wave of people arrived: the Celts. The Celts were an advanced, aggressive people who swept into England from the continent, bringing iron, formal kingdoms, and money that was new to the island. Iron weapons were superior to bronze, allowing the Celts to sweep away the disunited tribes. Furthermore, iron tools made for better farming implements, allowing the Celts to set down larger settlements that grew much faster. The defining feature of this new Iron Age in England was the hill fort. Expanding upon earlier Bronze Age designs, Iron Age hill forts were large fortified settlements built into hills and ringed by large walls. From these forts, local rulers could command obedience from surrounding tribes. The largest Iron Age hill fort was Maiden Castle in Dorset, which encompassed a 47-acre area at its height during the 5th century BC. It appears that the Celts relegated the existing Britons to second-class status and enjoyed a superior aristocratic status. Celtic society has two major divisions: the warriors and the priests known as Druids. Celtic religion was deeply rooted in land and nature, which were infused with spirits, as told by the Druids. Celtic society also developed a distinct artistic style defined by the use of flowing curves that are still recognizable today. In 325 BC, the Greek merchant explorer Pytheas landed on the island's shores, marking the first recorded visit from an outsider to the island, which he names Britannicae or Britanniae. The account of his visits survives only in references from other authors, but we know that he visited the tin mines in Cornwall and found Britain to be a generally peaceful place ruled by many independent kings and princes. Over time, hill forts died out as the more powerful kingdoms emerged, which were able to establish security over vast areas. By the 1st century BC, England was pockmarked with these Celtic kingdoms who could rule over undefended rural settlements, a mark of true stability and security. The arrival of Rome. English society had come a long way, but it was nothing in the eyes of the true power of the day, Rome. When Caesar arrived on British shores in 55 BC, the Romans knew little of Britain outside of what Greek travelers had told them. Caesar knew of its wealth in metal and potential slaves, and its warrior inhabitants could be a source of glory for the up-and-coming Roman general. The Britons' simple chariots and disorganized tactics were little match for Caesar's elite legions, but his conquest was cut short by a rebellion back in Gaul. Caesar returns the following year, this time driving the Britons back across the Thames River. However, events elsewhere demanded his attention yet again. Caesar accepted tribute and pledges of friendship from some of the local kings, but did not leave a garrison. It would be a waste of men for too little benefit. Britain was mostly forgotten for the next century as Rome convulsed in civil wars. However, trade and friendship with some of its kings continued. This included King Cunobeline of Colchester, who died in 42 AD to be replaced by his son, Caratacus. Caratacus had no respect for Roman power and set out to conquer neighboring Roman client kings like King Versia of Atrebates. In 43 AD, Emperor Claudius, eager for a military victory to boost his reputation, directed his legions to Britain to conquer the island once and for all. The Romans forced a landing in Kent and again cut swiftly through the Britons. Roman power attracted some of the local kings and warriors to pledge loyalty, leaving resistors like Caratacus isolated. In 50 AD, Caratacus made his final stand against the Romans somewhere near the Welsh border. After his defeat, he fled the battle and sought sanctuary with the Brigantine queen Cartimandua, who immediately surrendered him to the Romans. Caratacus's capture was the symbolic end of pre-Roman Britain. Within a few years, Rome controlled most of modern England and Wales, from Kent over to Anglesey, and from the English Channel up to the River Humber. Boudicca's Rebellion. This control was still tenuous, though. In 61 AD, Prasutagus, chief of the Iceni tribe in eastern England, died. The Romans ignored his will that his kingdom go to his family and annexed the Iceni land instead. This insult would not be forgiven by Prasutagus's wife, a fiery woman named Boudicca, who was flogged and her daughters raped by Roman men when she protested. Boudicca took up arms to avenge her family's honor. She rallied other tribes to her causes, pointing to Roman taxation and settlement as intrusions on their own way of life. In a speech attributed to Boudicca, she said to her followers, "Let us show them that they are hares and foxes trying to rule over dogs and wolves." Boudicca's armies marched upon the Roman center at Colchester, where they slaughtered the civilians and fended off the small Roman army sent to stop them. The bulk of Rome's forces under Gaius Suetonius Paulinus were occupied in North Wales, but rushed back to defend London when word reached them. Paulinus arrived just ahead of Boudicca's forces, but had no time to prepare a proper defense, so he abandoned the city. London was burned to the ground, and any citizens who could not escape were slain. Some 80,000 people were said to have been killed. The Roman army withdrew to the northwest, where they dug in at a small valley. The exact location has been lost, and awaited Boudicca's men. The Romans numbered just 10,000 against a Celtic force that was probably around 100,000 strong. Boudicca's followers were so confident of victory that the warriors' families and communities came out to watch the battle, drawing their camps and wagons up behind the Celtic line. However, the Roman troops were disciplined and well-trained. The disorganized Celtic warriors broke upon the Roman line and were cut down by the thousands. When the Celts turned to retreat, they found themselves trapped by the family's wagons and carts. Paulinus gave them no mercy. Almost all of the Celts were slain. Boudicca escaped, but sources disagree on whether she died of illness or poison not long after. Roman Britain. Boudicca's defeat brought Britain under firm Roman control. Affirming this control were three primary legions stationed at Chester, York, and Caerleon. They were connected to each other and to the Roman cities by a well-maintained and well-patrolled road network that eased trade and travel throughout England. Things were more difficult in the north, where the hilly terrain had to be littered with forts to control the surrounding area. Governor Julius Agricola managed to push Roman control into modern-day Scotland. There, he achieved victory over the native Caledonians at the Battle of Mons Graupius in 83 AD, but he was recalled to Rome before he could complete the conquest of the island. the Caledonians and other northern groups raided into Roman England in the following decades. In 122, Emperor Hadrian decided enough was enough and ordered the construction of a border wall. 15 feet high and stretching 73 miles from the mouth of the Tyne River to Solway Firth on the Irish Sea, Hadrian's Wall was the largest defensive construction in the empire. It took almost 10,000 men to guard the wall and man the forts dotted across its length. It worked, though, managing to halt further raids into England for years. It marked the limits of Roman power and foreshadowed the divide between England and Scotland. Still, the province of Britannia was more an occupied territory than a settled Roman colony. Most of its Roman population were soldiers or officials, although a mix of Romano-British population would emerge over the next 300 years of Roman rule. The chief centres of power were Colchester, Gloucester, Lincoln, London, and York, but there were some 30 or so recognized towns. By the 2nd century, London, with around 30,000 citizens, was the largest city in the province. Towns were the centers and symbols of Roman power. With stone architecture, sewers, hygiene, and literacy, they were a radical departure from pre-Roman life. Rather than a warrior aristocracy, power was exercised by wealthy townspeople and by appointed or elected Roman magistrates. They brought Roman law, economic models, culture, art, dress, food, and literature unlike anything ever seen in England. Perhaps nowhere embodied this new Roman luxury like Aquae Sulis, today known as Bath, which became a leisure resort known across the empire for its natural springs. Wealthy Romans who tired of the city might retire to one of the hundreds of villas across England. These grand estates offered all the luxuries of Roman life, decorated with fine art and in some cases blessed with heated floors. Villas usually commanded large estates upon which slaves or tenants would grow crops, raise animals, or practice other crafts to support the villa's owner. However, most people in Britain did not live in these towns or in villas. Most people were still farmers living in rural villages. Roman rule affected them through taxes and the building of roads and forts across their land. Life was safer and more stable than before, but probably less free and with heavier taxes. Rome extracted both monetary taxes and a grain levy for its troops, which many Britons struggled to pay. One solution was to pivot to livestock rearing, which was much more lucrative than crop raising. Sheep were the favorite, and Roman Britain became the center of a thriving wool industry as a result. English wool would remain an economic staple and major export for centuries to come. Aside from wool, Britain's other great exports was metal. Tin continued to be useful, of course, but lead was becoming a big boom for the Romans. They used it in pottery, pipes, and baths, and Britain was one of the best sources of it anywhere in the empire. Lead deposits often yielded silver as well, which the Romans had plenty of use for too. The departure of Rome. Roman Britain enjoyed remarkable peace and stability for almost 300 years, but eventually, the Roman Empire would unravel. The Roman Empire was afflicted by internal strife, barbarian invasion, and economic collapse, all of which fell hard on Britain. By the 3rd century, the Saxons from the northern coast of Europe began raiding along the coast. The Romans struggled to fend them off. In 367, the Saxons allied with the Picts and Scots to launch a simultaneous attack on Roman Britain from north, east, and west. The great barbarian conspiracy overran Hadrian's Wall and decimated Roman forces. Rome managed to restore order, but Roman Britain would never truly recover. As imperial authority collapsed, pretenders to the throne arose. In 383, Magnus Maximus declared himself emperor from Britain and took his troops with him back to Gaul. What few troops remained afterward were siphoned away to defend against the Visigoth invasions in the 390s. Throw in yet another Roman commander in Britain, Constantine III, declaring himself emperor in 407, and there were precious few men left to hold the island. Roman rule ended with a whimper. The last Roman soldiers and officials left in 409, never to return. They left behind an island of advanced Roman towns ruled by a Romano-British aristocracy, surrounded by a countryside with an overwhelming population of rural Celtic Britons, to whom Roman rule had meant little more than taxes and roads. Over the coming decades and centuries, the Roman forts and many of their cities fell into ruin. The peace and unity of the Roman days faded, its legacy enduring only in roads, ruins, and a few major cities, and perhaps most of all, Christianity. A new chapter had begun, one that would be defined by waves of new invaders that would forge a new nation out of the ruins Rome left behind.